Swear to me. Swear that when I tell you what I'm about to tell you, you won't fly off into a murderous rampage, okay? Okay. When I first played The Last of Us, I didn't like it. The Last of Us is a pretty big deal. It's not just that it's among the most highly reviewed games ever, that it's hoovered up dozens of awards, that the franchise has sold more than 37 million copies across 3 generations of console. It's more than that. The people who like this game don't just like it, they describe it as a revelatory, emotional experience. But I just don't get it. It's not that I think it's a bad game. I can see what it's doing, and I think it does that very well. It's a deeply personal story told in a way only video games can. The Last of Us takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, besieged by a parasitic fungus which turns people into murderous zombies. Sorry, not zombies. The infected. Very different. The story follows Joel, an emotionally damaged smuggler haunted by the death of his daughter, who is tasked with transporting Ellie, a bratish teenager who is miraculously immune to the fungus. Together, they cross the dangerous wastelands of Boston and Pittsburgh to reach a group of scientists who may be able to use Ellie to create a cure. It's the relationship between Joel and Ellie that's the real heart of this story. They are first thrown together as unwilling companions, but by enduring a grueling slog of increasingly traumatic challenges, they forge a close bond. And because the player has shared that journey, they share that bond too. Except for me, apparently. I don't know what to tell you. I've listened to people describe their intense emotional responses to the game, and I can even understand why they feel that way, but it just doesn't provoke the same kind of reaction in me. Every time I play it, I'm sorry, I just lose interest. So, when HBO first announced their TV adaptation,
it's not TV, it's HBO.
I had no reason to think it would be any different. But my friends were all, oh my god, it's really good, honestly, you'd love it, have you got to episode 3 yet? On and on and on, until finally I said, fine, I'll watch it. And, oh, now I get it. How did that happen? The adaptation has been lauded for its accuracy to the game. And yeah, it is painstakingly accurate, replicating the aesthetic, mimicking the cinematography, even reusing some of the same actors. And it doesn't just mirror the plot beat for beat, it lifts entire scenes from the game, unchanged.
You don't bring up Tess, ever. Matter of fact, we can just keep our histories to ourselves.
Is this really all they have to worry about? Boys, movies, deciding which shirt goes with which skirt. Don't scare it. Don't scare it.
I won't.
What are you doing?
It's all right.
I've seen a lot of people attribute this accuracy to the show's success, and I suppose that's not untrue. The game has kind of already done most of the work. The story's already written. We've got aesthetic, mood, tone, music, basically a whole proof of concept ready-made. Surely all they have to do is take all of that and then film it. Except what you've missed there is the game. The experience is more than just narrative and aesthetic. If that's all you're adapting, you're gonna lose something crucial in translation. An intelligent psychological horror becomes an incoherent B-movie. An engrossing puzzle adventure becomes a dumb action flick. An open world with expansive movement mechanics becomes an overlong parkour video. Sure, you can make action sequences that are very evocative of the gameplay, but that's not quite the same as adapting the game experience. So, a TV adaptation of The Last of Us kinda shouldn't work. Take out the interactive element and all you're left with is another run-of-the-mill zombie story. Okay, the fungus idea is a new spin, the rules are a little different, but it's all familiar tropes. a ragtag crew making their way across the ruins of civilization, communities attempting to carve out some form of society after the end of the world, a man hired by a rebellion to escort a young woman across a post-apocalyptic wasteland because she might be the savior of humankind. For a game, an unsubtle, tropey story works in its favor. It creates a familiar role for the player to step into, and provides easy justification for everything it wants the player to do. The real story is in the player's experience. But for a TV show, not only will it struggle to recreate a similar experience, it also won't feel like it's doing anything original. Granular details like positioning a ladder, or Ellie's copy of No Pun Intended, or the bloater's kill animations might be fun to those who recognize them, but they don't elevate the show beyond inferior imitation. An accurate adaptation isn't always the same thing as an authentic one. Often, copying things directly doesn't stay true to the spirit of the thing. But just because The Last of Us is incredibly faithful to its source material, doesn't mean it's not aware of that. The original game tells its story in a very cinematic way. There's lots of cutscenes, lots of dialogue. It's divided into chapters, episodes, each telling an isolated smaller story which drives the larger one. Even among linear games, it is especially linear. It leads the player through scripted scenes and predetermined encounters, encouraging certain styles of play at different moments by limiting which tools the player has available. From narrative down to gameplay, it has one story to tell, from which the player can't deviate. The game kinda already wants to be a TV show, or rather, it wants to make the player feel like they're in one.
There wasn't really anything playable in the giraffe moment in the game. It was a cutscene that you watched as television, and I didn't see a reason to not repeat it perfectly, because I thought it was perfect. And if I don't need to do any of the adaptation tricks and magic and whatever things we do to get it from this medium to this medium, why would I?
So it's not that the show is gunning for accuracy, it's just that the skill it takes to know when something should change is the same skill it takes to know when something should stay the same. The show understands the similarities between these mediums just as well as the differences. Okay, but this doesn't explain why my reaction to the show was so different to the game. Clearly, they did something different. And though The Last of Us may lend itself more easily to adaptation compared to other games, it's not as if the interactive element doesn't matter. Surely they still lost something in translation. In order to stay true to the spirit of the thing, something has to change. The game is firmly rooted in Joel's point of view, more or less. You do play as his daughter Sarah in the prologue, and there's one chapter where you play as Ellie, but for the most part, the way you experience this story and this world is through Joel's eyes. And that's something which television can't easily replicate. And yet, in what may seem like a counterintuitive decision, the show goes in the opposite direction.
In the game, Tess tells you that she got jumped by Robert Smith. Here you get to see it. It's hinted at in the game that there's a romantic relationship between Joel and Tess. And here we see her crawl into bed with him. You know that at some point, Marlene found Ellie, and she found out under particular circumstances. Here you get to see more of that. You're coming into the game post all those things. Here we get to dramatize and see them. So in a way, this is it's making the game richer, because these events that are referred to offhandedly, you get to experience what they were like.
We frequently leave Joel behind to explore other characters. Minor characters are expanded, with stories independent of Joel's. Entirely new characters are invented to give life and face to stories that, in the game, are only implied. It jumps around in time to characters Joel never even meets in order to tell the larger story of this world. There are even episodes in which Joel is almost entirely absent. The show expands its point of view beyond Joel's to tell a much broader and detailed story. And I've seen people describe this as improving the story, some going so far as to call the game a first draft, which the show finished off. And again, That's not entirely untrue. They are using the game as a foundation to build upon, but even I can see the story the game tells is entirely appropriate for a game. Because it's always so rooted in a character's perspective, there are details it simply cannot expand upon without breaking immersion. Games aren't structured into distinct scenes. It's harder to cut away, to time skip, to have separate plots running in parallel. But these things come naturally to TV.
And we will also take advantage of the freedom we have in television that wasn't there in the game, specifically the advantage of changing perspective.
Once again, the game tells a surprisingly rich character story in a way only video games can. The show can't do that. So instead, it does it in a way only television can. You get a surprisingly rich character story, and you get a surprisingly rich character story. Surprisingly rich character stories for everyone. Okay, but more doesn't automatically mean better. Isn't all of this just padding? Won't all this new stuff just turn the show into something the game never was? There are two ways the adaptation stays authentic to the source material. First is, wherever possible, it draws inspiration from the game. As has been said, a lot of the new material comes from events the game references but never shows. Otherwise, it's based on bonus material. Episode 7 comes from DLC. Details of the game's sequel are layered in. The scenes with Ellie's mother is based on a short story Neil Druckmann wrote but never published. The second and more important way the game maintains authenticity is by holding true to the game's theme.
We wanted to make an experience that really explored the unconditional love a parent feels for a child. How can we construct a story that through its interaction, through its characters, through the relationship, through music, through everything we have at our disposal, make you feel the wonderful and horrible things that can come out of love.
Where the adaptation expands and invents, it holds true to that theme, exploring the things love drives people to do. When expanding David and his flock, it steers hard into their vengeance, because the man Joel killed was loved.
Yes, we found a girl who was with the man who took Alec from us.
You should kill him. You should kill both of them.
When giving face to the hunters, it invents their leader, Kathleen, who is driven by love for her lost brother.
The last time I saw him alive, in jail, he told me to forgive. And what did he get for that?
But is so blinded by revenge, she dismisses the more urgent threat facing those who follow her, until her love becomes their doom. When expanding Henry and Sam's story, the most important change is not that Sam is deaf. According to showrunner Craig Mazin, that arose from wanting their conversations to feel distinct from Joel's and Ellie's. No, the key addition is that Sam had leukemia, and Henry loved his brother so much he betrayed the resistance to get Sam treatment.
Still think they should take it easy on me? Or am I the bad guy?
But by far the biggest departure from the game is the addition of a whole love story. In the game, Bill is a paranoid loner who survives in an abandoned town with his expansive armory and explosive traps. As he helps Joel and Ellie acquire a working car, the player learns about Frank, Bill's former partner, Bill's words, who Bill describes as a burden.
Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. Somebody I had to look after. And in this world, that sort of good for one thing, getting you killed.
Frank abandoned Bill, left him an insulting note, became infected, hung himself, and though Bill is clearly affected by discovering his body, Bill insists he's better off without Frank.
Well, him.
In the game, we never meet Frank alive, whereas the show devotes a whole episode to telling Bill and Frank's story, how they met, how they lived together, and how they fell in love. The change here isn't making Bill and Frank lovers, that's implied in the game. That is how Bill's actor W.L. Brown chose to play those scenes, and the developers reshot the scene where Ellie swipes a dirty magazine from Bill's place in order to reflect that choice.
How the hell would he even walk around with that thing?
Get rid of that.
Bye-bye, dude.
The original line was, "Bye-bye, ladies." After we shot that scene with Bill, it changed it, and so they went and changed the magazine and changed everything. I was like, wow.
No, the change here is the function Bill and Frank serve. Or rather, the way in which they serve their function. At this point in the story, Joel's lover, Tess, has just died. Joel blames Ellie, and is only escorting her because it was Tess's dying wish, not because he has any genuine desire to protect her.
I'm not family.
No. You're cargo.
Enter Bill, who, firstly, rubs salt in that wound.
How in the hell is Tess okay with this suicide mission?
It's actually her idea.
Really?
Which the adaptation does too.
Use them to keep...
But mainly, in the game, Bill represents the path Joel could take, but doesn't, regarding love as a burden that will only lead to pain or death, which ultimately brings Bill to a pathetic, isolated existence, a cautionary tale for Joel. In the adaptation, the opposite happens. Bill and Frank live a long life together, and get maybe the happiest ending possible in an apocalypse, but it still makes the same point. This time, Bill begins pathetic and isolated, literally and emotionally guarded in his armored compound, until Frank breaches his defenses, literally and emotionally. Frank teaches Bill how to have relationships, not just with Frank, but with people. And every step of the way, Bill resists, because he feels love is a burden. It makes him vulnerable.
I was never afraid before you showed up.
In the end, this Frank leaves Bill too, not by abandoning him, not because of the infection, but simply because of time.
There wasn't anything to cure this before the world fell apart.
But instead of rejecting love, this version of Bill allows it to destroy him.
This isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play. I'm old. I'm satisfied. And you were my purpose.
It's the same point, not as a cautionary tale, but as a lesson by example.
I used to hate the world, and I was happy when everyone died. But I was wrong, because there was one person worth saving.
And here, the show had an emotional impact on me, which the game never did. And that's partly because I'm so starved for representation, I'm not used to seeing myself reflected on screen. Straight people, is this how you feel when you watch anything? But it's also a poignant, touching story the game could never have told, not with all its time jumps and unspoken tensions. But because it holds true to the theme, it feels very authentic to the game. Some have called it filler, because it's not about Joel and Ellie, and these people couldn't be more wrong. The Last of Us is a story about people protecting the ones they love. It's Bill's and Frank's all the way down. Bill and Frank, 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 Bill and Frank.
Maybe the least fillery thing we did across this entire season was the Bill and Frank story, because it is the like I said, the skeleton key for everything that happens.
Both the game and the TV show end the same way. Joel delivers Ellie to the scientists, where it turns out they can use her to create a cure, but doing so involves drastic surgery, which will kill her. Joel is given the chance to walk away, but instead, he massacres the scientists, rescues an unconscious Ellie, and lies to her about what he did.
Swear to me that everything you said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
This ending is a huge part of why this game is so lauded. After a long and arduous journey protecting Ellie as Joel, the ambiguous morality stirs a big spoon into a lot of emotions. Whether the player agrees with Joel's actions or not, they will surely empathize with his drive to protect Ellie. How could the adaptation ever compete with such a personal experience? Well, I never reached the end of the game. I first learned about the ending in reviews and critiques, so I can't know what my unadulterated reaction would have been. But I do know a big reason I didn't get on with the game is because I didn't identify with Joel. I'm not a parent, I don't have any younger siblings. I feel protective of my loved ones, sure, but I've never felt that being a protector was my role. I guess I'm more of a Frank than a Bill. And I know you're not necessarily supposed to like Joel, but the ending relies on the player feeling protective of Ellie in a way similar to him. And while I'm sure I would have wanted to try and save Ellie, I doubt I'd have been prepared to kill those people to do it. Nevertheless, that is what the game requires of the player. If you don't, the game stops. There's even a point where the game will not let you proceed until you kill the doctor about to perform the surgery. I've talked before about the discomfort of games requiring me to commit violence I don't agree with, but The Last of Us isn't unaware of that discomfort. The ambiguity is the point.
When we first saw the script for the last scene, I remember looking at you and saying, "Are you afraid that people are going to hate this?" And you said, "No. I don't care if they hate it or if they love it. I just don't want them to be ambivalent."
It's a good ending for this story, a logical conclusion of its theme. However, I feel the reason this game affects people so strongly is because, whether they agree with Joel's actions or not, on some level they get why he does this. My inability to empathize with Joel is a barrier to me investing in this story. I'd rather put the controller down than do what Joel wants to do. So, the fact the adaptation cannot perfectly recreate the game's emotional journey is, for me at least, one of its strengths. Because the show is not as deeply rooted in Joel's perspective, there is more room to view his actions objectively, more room to disagree with him. But even though I do still disagree, I find myself understanding him better. I may not identify with Joel, but I do identify with Bill. I know what this kind of shame feels like, and I know how powerful it is to have your identity validated. That is a strong emotion that might drive somebody to do terrible things. So it's not hard to imagine Bill doing for Frank what Joel does for Ellie. Bill's story is Joel's story. They both allow themselves to be destroyed by their love.
We're watching somebody burn his own soul to save the person he loves.
In the game, you kinda have to view all the other characters through Joel, but in the show, it's possible to view Joel through the other characters. I can also see him through Ellie's eyes. Both the show and the game make clear that, if given the choice, Ellie would not want Joel to save her.
It's what she'd want. And you know it. After all we've been through.
It can't be for nothing.
But by expanding Ellie's story, the show gives this more weight. We met Ellie before Joel did. We've seen parts of her life Joel hasn't. How she was born, her relationship with Marlene, what happened with Riley, which is now part of this story, placed before the ending rather than as optional DLC afterwards. The game is pretty firmly Joel's story, but the show is just as much Ellie's. I interpret this ending as an act of supreme selfishness. Both Joel and Marlene are making decisions on Ellie's behalf, when if they just let her make the choice about her own life, things would have ended better. You can make this interpretation of the game, but it's in the show where it really resonates for me, where I feel the weight of what has been robbed from Ellie and humankind. And because all the game's stories have been expanded, to the point one of them has a specific emotional resonance with me, I can now look at Joel and say, listen mate, I still don't agree, but I kinda get it. Now that the show has been greenlit for a second series, some have expressed concerns whether it can be as successful in adapting the game's more controversial sequel. I think a lot of people's issue with the second game mirrors my issue with the first. It frequently requires you to commit questionable acts of violence, having you act out both sides of the same conflict, meaning if you're invested in these characters, you will be forced to do things that you don't want to do. Some people found that discomfort very powerful. Others found it off-putting. So, without daring to make any predictions about the next season, I wonder if, for many, this story might also benefit from a broad perspective instead of a subjective one. I don't think The Last of Us has figured out the trick to adapting video games. It just so happened that what is normally the downfall of these adaptations, losing the perspective of a participant, actually worked this time. It cast a new light on this story, which allowed it to be viewed in a different way, a way I could get on board with.
Our philosophy was not to ever say, oh, if you're a fan, you're going to be like, oh yeah, they did the thing just for me, that doesn't matter. Everything needed to have resonance for people that don't understand.
And this is the best justification for any adaptation. The goal is not to surpass or even equal the original, but to transport it. It's not that The Last of Us isn't trying to appeal to fans. Honestly, I think it could stand to do a little less of that. But it is not primarily concerned with winning over the existing audience. It is just as focused, if not more so, on bringing this story to an entirely new one. And I am living proof that it succeeded. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting the channel on Patreon at patreon.com/JamesWoodall, where you can get early releases, comment responses, and other bonus content. Be sure to subscribe to see future videos, and remember to like, share, and comment. Thank you.